Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the making of the Wicked Witch of the West replica costume. As you can see here, I have a new super cool sewing machine. Um, I actually was given this machine, believe it or not. It's a really cool 1950s sewing machine made in Japan. It is all metal. It's got this really cool wooden table that it sits on, and it works fantastic. Have a listen to how it sounds here. And here is how my old one, made out of plastic mostly, or partly, sounds like. I love the old one for memory's sake. I've had it since I was a kid, but this new one sounds so much better and works so good. So I was super thrilled to have received this. It's all about who you know. Okay, so firstly here I am working on the collar for the top. I stitched the sides together. I flatlined it with some stiff polyester, um, and then opened it up, turned it outside, and now I'm just stitching it to the bodice section. And the back side of the bodice is still left undone, so it's much easier to stitch it on flat. Okay, so working on the skirt panels here, I am basting them together. This rayon, this black rayon, is great for it being billowy and flowy, works great with the costume. However, they're so shifty when you try to sew them together, so baste them together just makes the sewing process easier. And here I am sewing them together. So the finishing that I'm using for the skirt here is French seams. So first part is doing the first stitch, and then now I'm pressing them just to one side. It'll make it easier for the next steps. So pressing it one side, and then I'm about to trim away down to about an eighth of an inch to a fourth of an inch. And then I'm going to turn them out and then sew it again. Here I am trimming them down. And then I ironed that side to lay flat. And then you fold it again, and then you sew along that fold. It encases the raw edge into itself, and is a really great way to finish a seam. Alright, so in the pattern, the simplicity pattern, it says to gather the skirt to the bodice, but I didn't want to do that. Just didn't like the look of it. I didn't like the idea of it. So I want to do pleats here. And I tried to use math as best I could. I'm not sure what the method to my madness was. I can't really remember, but it was something. As you can see, I'm using a tape measure, and I just needed to make the skirt length to the same size as the bodice. Okay, so I remember what I did here. I did more pleats in the back and in the front because that's kind of where I wanted the fullness to be, and then now I'm doing them on the sides. And I'm just kind of filling them in just to make them the same length. And now it comes to pinning the skirt to the bodice to be sewn. I use the same pins to pin the pleats into place as the same ones to pin the bodice to the skirt together. It's easy because then I can just hold the pleats together with my fingers until I've matched the two seams together and then just re-stick the pin in the same spot. Okay, so yeah, lots of pins, and now I'm just sewing those two together. I did sew over the pins. You are able to do this. I know it's a little bit scary to see. But it is alright to sew over pins. The needle does dodge the pins. I don't always do that, but I did that this time. Nah. And I did need to use a lot of pins here because, as I said, this fabric is just really shifty. And so the more pins I use, the easier it was for the two layers to stay in the same place. Almost done there with the end. And yes, I do have that fun old-fashioned tomato pin cushions. So I'm just removing all the pins, sticking them in that pin cushion there, and sticking them. Filling up that pin cushion. Don't you love the sight of that? And on an old-fashioned sewing machine too. Okay. Alright, so this was the tricky part, which was hemming the skirt on a rolled hem. And I have the rolled hem foot on my sewing machine. It's very tricky to do on a curved seam, and the hem of the skirt was a little bit curved. So there was a lot of stop and go and readjusting and having to turn the end so that it does do the roll. This is it starts with the curved section, and then it does get flatter, and it's a little bit easier too once it gets flat. So this is a section where it became flatter and it was easier to do. As you can see, I'm able to go a lot quicker. I'm not stopping and starting a lot. I worked much better at that part. Alrighty, so now stitching the zipper in place. I got the zipper foot on, and I just love lining up that zipper foot with the edge of the zipper. And I just used some pins, I didn't use any tape or anything. So the zipper is the closure for this, and it's the entire bodice piece and goes down to a little bit of the skirt section as well. I think it's a 22-inch zipper. Okay, so now working on the very end of the zipper as I just rolled up or zipped up the zipper part of the zipper. As you know, it's easier to do so you don't have to try to dodge that, or the sewing machine kind of curves around that and creates a weird part of the stitch. And then sewing up the second side of the zipper here. Okay, so what I'm doing now is pinning the backside of the skirt together and basting it together as well. It was a lot easier to work on the pleating and the sewing of the skirt to the bodice together with the back not closed. And so now that I have the zipper on, I can do the final seam of the skirt. I use a really long basting thread, and that's okay with me. If you're careful, it doesn't tangle together. And now sewing those two seams together on the sewing machine. So in the pattern, the skirt is all one length, but if you see in the movie, she has a train to the skirt, and I think the train looks great. It helps with the dramatic, the regal look of the costume. And so what I did, I didn't film any of this, sorry. I just used the pattern piece that came with the pattern that I had and just kind of added a little bit of a train to the end. So it's maybe 18 inches or so of a train in the back. All right, so time to dig out the cape pieces that have been in this bin waiting to be used for several years. And they got a sticky on them so that I know which pieces they were, or else it's hard to figure out because they look alike. So something I also didn't film was that the cape trails behind her in the original movie about 2 feet. I didn't do quite that much. I think I did 20 inches. But I just kind of did the same thing. I took the pattern piece for the cape that it had and added 20 inches, roughly, in the back to give it that trail behind her. It looks so much more interesting than a cape that's all the same length. So just pinning them together at the seams and then basting them together as well. Otherwise, those layers do shift. The fabric is thin and sleek, so it's really necessary to baste here. And once again, I'm using French seams for the finishing here as well. And in the pattern in the pieces that I made, I ended up with 3 different pieces sewn together for the cape. I think in the pattern it was 4 pieces, but I didn't want it to cover the entire front and back. I wanted it to kind of be off the shoulders, so I kind of adjusted to 3 pieces and stitched them all together. And what I'm doing here is my creative making up what I'm calling the yoke part of the cape. It's similar to a collar too. I'm calling it a yoke. So in the pattern it says stitch some cording to the neck and then tie the cords together, but I didn't like that. Also, it's very different from the original one. What I did was trace the edge of the cape, and now I'm drawing a yoke, a part that will be the closure of the cape at the neckline. So I took the measurement of what the neck should be and then divided it in half, and I'm kind of adjusting the measuring tape to that length and fitting it on a curve to draw the other part of the neckline, if that makes sense. I hope it makes sense. And then as you can see, I kind of smoothed out that curve line. And I'm just adding 5/8 seam allowance on every side. And I have here some stiff cotton and then the rayon fashion fabric underneath it. I'm just going to cut them out at the same time. I'm tracing over the pieces with some chalk. And I wised up this time and used cotton instead of polyester, thank goodness. By the way, I never want to buy polyester again. Are you guys with me? I can't stand it because it's essentially plastic. Ugh. What I did was I folded the pattern piece for the yoke that I just made. I cut it in half, and because it's symmetrical on each side, and then just traced it on the half with along the fold of each fabric. Okay, so now I unfolded them and I'm pinning them together and basting them. And similar to the collar and any collar, I'm leaving one side not basted because I do have to turn it out after I've sewn it. Keeping that 5/8 seam allowance on every side. And then what I'm going to do next is grade that down. So here I'm trimming away most of the seam allowance, especially on these corners here, because you want to get a sharp corner when you turn it out. And it is a curved piece, so I am trimming down pretty far, 1/8, 1/4 of an inch. And consequently trimming away the basing layers too. Sometimes I leave the basing layers in if they're not shown. Okay, so here I'm turning it out. There's there's a corner in the yoke there, and it's hard to do with your fingers, so what I need is a sharp but not too sharp tool to poke out those corners. And what I grab is my pencil to poke out those corners. It is kind of an awkward piece to turn out, so it takes a little bit of time. You do want it to look good. Okay, so what you didn't see is that I did open up that seam and iron that down on the ham there, and now I have the piece flat here, and then I'm ironing it down flat. Just gotta adjust it a little bit to get it to open up fully, and then the ironing down makes it nice and crisp and flat. And here I am pinning that yoke collar piece, I'm not entirely sure what to call it still, to the cape. and stitching them together. And now I'm felling down the seam, just turning the bottom edge, the bottom seam allowance over to the top, and using a small felling stitch. And the closure is 2 hooks and eyes. A little bit of hand sewing. And here we have the finished costume. I am super happy with how this turned out. This was years in the making, guys. It took me years to make. Okay, I wasn't working every day, of course. There were some long periods of time where I wasn't working on it. But overall, I'm really happy with it. I had to get really creative sometimes, but it was a lot of fun and very satisfying. And finally, it's done! Well, there's the Wicked Witch. You like being in all black? Thank you so much for watching. I think next I'll post a video on how I made the hat. That was really fun. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to my channel if you feel so led. And I will see you next time.